kind of gloomy day in September. Hope you all had a good week. We'll wait a couple more minutes to see if anybody else shows up or if we scared everyone away after our last class. But maybe while we're doing that, if you have seen any trees beginning to change color, maybe you could let us know in the chat, or if there's something you want to share about trees, you could put that in the chat too, or you can just say it since we're just a small group right now.
So I saw some great leaves the other day. These are some of my favorites. When hobblebush turns, it gets these incredible purple veins initially. Have you seen that, Susie?
I have seen that. As soon as you said hobblebush, that's what came to my mind. I love that. Yeah. I haven't noticed that many trees beginning to turn, but this morning when I went walking, I found a bunch of wild grape plants, and those were beginning to change, actually right across from Kathleen's house. And it made me realize the season is changing. I always have trouble giving up summer. I don't mind the other seasons, but I love summer. And so that's hard to give up. And this morning I did notice the evergreens were looking very lush. And is that from the rain, Jeremy, you think?
What do you mean by lush? Just green?
Super green. Yeah.
I don't know. It's probably the lighting more than anything, because I don't think the rain would change them that quickly.
That's true.
I'm sure it's been such a wet year that maybe they're just looking particularly lush, and you could see it this morning.
Yeah, I do think you're right. It could be the lighting. But it looked great. Right across on Hunts Pond, where I was this morning, I looked out and there was mist rising and loons on the lake, and the evergreens just looked very, very dark green. It's beautiful. All right, I think we'll get started. It's just about 10:02. So welcome to the second part of Seeing the Forest, a discussion on the hidden life of trees by Peter Wohlleben. And before we get started, I just want to let everybody know that this is being recorded, but it won't be made public. It'll only be sent to people who had signed up for this course. But if you don't want to be seen on the recording, you can always shut your video off. And also want to remind everybody about a really great opportunity tonight. I know I mentioned this the last time we met, but it's Tom Wessels, and he doesn't often, it can be hard to hear Tom and see Tom talk, but he is out and about talking about a brand new book that he has called Roadside Ecology of New England. And he's a really good writer and a thinker, and people really enjoy his talks. So if you've never seen Tom Wessels talk, you can join us tonight for free via Zoom. All you have to do is sign up. And I'll put that link in the chat once I finish chitter-chattering myself. So Jeremy, do you have anything you want to add about any upcoming things for people to be looking forward to?
I guess just annual meeting time, and I'm not even remembering the date, but it looks like our annual meeting is going to be remote again this year. But I think it's going to be exciting because we're going to bring out some fun awards, but also talk about some new strategic objectives. We've just been through a strategic planning process. So.
Great. I think it's October 5th, and I will also put that in the chat. So enough of us giving lots of ads about upcoming events at the Harris Center. I do want to go over what we're up to today. We're going to start off our morning with some discussion around the book and people's reactions. And then we're going to move into Jeremy kind of talking about, well, Jeremy, do you want to share what you're going to talk about? Because I'm always afraid I say it wrong.
We'll see how the discussions go, but if with time, I thought I'd just go through some passages in the book and relate I don't know, I don't know what word to use, but maybe more the conventional understanding of the processes that he's talking about, or the forest dynamics that he's talking about.
Great. It should be really exciting. So just to start off, I thought I'd do a quick check-in. I sent out a big list of articles to read, from the New York Times to the New Yorker to that audio or video of Cy Montgomery and Peter Wohlleben having a discussion through the toadstool. And I'm just curious if he's had a chance to see or read any of those things, if there's any kind of feedback or sharing that we'd like to do around that. Check in. Hey, Nancy, you're so brave. Go, Nancy.
Yes, even after watching myself in the last week, I thought, who is that old lady? But I would want to share that I do feel the same way he does about trees. I've always felt a very strong connection to them. And the trees that I've planted, I've always hugged to make sure they, in the spring, to make sure they get through the season. And I think that I still have that feeling, although I haven't been in a forest for quite a long time, unless somebody takes me, and that's a little difficult around here. But I think that just there was a forest near my house where I lived in Ohio, and it was mostly beech maple, which is the climax forest in that part of the state. And it had more trilliums. It had a different kind of undergrowth. And I always enjoyed walking in there because it just smells different. I guess that's all I need to say.
So well said. I love that. And I love how you framed it as having kind of a kinship with trees. And that really does come so through in his writing. He feels a deep heart kinship with the forest and the individual trees that make up that forest. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Kathleen?
Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Nancy. This is a hello to Gwen Loud from Gwen Loud. And there's a place that I go in the early springtime that's right against a cliff. And it has really large mature sugar maples as a story cover. And because those maple leaves are so rich, the diversity of spring ephemerals is incredible. We go there once a year to look at it, and it's in a preserve, and it's really amazing. But the duff from sugar maples makes a much more alkaline soil, which gives the opportunity for all different of trilliums and dogtooth or I don't know, the yellow lilies, trout lilies with yellow flowers, and of course different types of ferns. And it's amazing what the layers of leaves can create. So I guess I wanted to bring that in with your conversation, Nancy.
Yeah, I kind of, Kathleen, I love that you're bringing up that it isn't just the tree and the tree itself, but it's kind of what the tree gives back to the forest by dropping its leaves and adding to the soil. And Jeremy, is there anything you want to add that you know in particular about sugar maples?
Well, they do have, you know this if you're a home gardener, if you use sugar maples in your mulch piles, it's a really easy leaf to break down, and provides for amazing mulch. And the same thing happens in the forest floor. If you look at oaks after, oftentimes even after a few 6 months, you still find the skeletons of oak leaves on the forest floor, whereas sugar maples are gone way faster than that, and they're just much more easy to digest, and so they provide that nutrient input back into the forest. So
thanks, that's great. And I'm just going to share from Matthew, who typed this into the chat. And this comes back to the articles that I sent out. He wrote, I thought the articles were super helpful and interesting. I thought the New Yorker piece by Robert Moore, who is awesome, and I agree, he's a wonderful writer and journalist, was a little snarky. it is the New Yorker, so we expect it to be a little snarky, but ended in the right place. Peter Wohlleben isn't primarily interested in getting into the scientific argument. His aim is to engage us in big, bold strokes about the wonder and community of a forest. And that is true. And I don't know if other people had a chance to read that article, but everything that Matthew described, I would totally agree with. And I just wondered, there was the book review from the Ecological Society, if anybody had a chance to read that and what they might have thought about some of the things that piece was bringing up. No, I'll have to give out a blue book quiz next week. No, just joking. There's no blue book quiz. Yeah, the reading was, of course, optional. I guess.
Well, Susie, I
yeah.
think I'm just be honest with you. You know, last week was very busy. I think it would be great to have that information and have another meeting after we've read it all. You know, I had Labor Day, visitors, travel, you know, but I really appreciate those things, and it would be fun to actually do that. So that's my.
Well, yeah, we could put that into our hopper and see if we could come up with another day where if people wanted to meet again, we could go a little further and talk a little more. Matthew, you look like you want to say something.
I just wanted to just say that one you just talked about, that book review was so good. I just want to commend it to the group. I thought that was really balanced too, kind of moving back and forth between some of the critiques and also some of the, not so much defending him, but more just kind of situating him in the right way so that we don't mistake him for trying to do something he's not doing. I think his book is highly general and poetic, and so it's a little bit of a tonal issue when you criticize a book that's trying to, you know, sing a song as though it's trying to do arithmetic. You know, it's kind of the type of genre. You get a sense of it as you read that book review. I thought it was balanced in a nice way.
Yeah, well said. And that is true. I mean, the good question is, what is the genre of the book? Does anybody want to take a stab on that? What do you guys think? If you were looking for the book, where would you go in the library, or where would you go in the bookstore? Would you look in the environment section? Would you look in the spiritual section? Where would you go? Self-help? No.
We should go to the Toadstool and see where it is. I bet it's under the same books that size are in and everything else.
Yeah, yep, it's in the environment section. You can think about when you're in the environment section or any book section, you know, there are broad categories, and within those there's, you know, different types of books. And I think Matthew makes a really good point in saying the book isn't really meant to be a primer on the science of forests. It's this person's kind of experience right from his heart. He writes so much from his own personal perspective. And I wonder, this is my question I wanted to ask is, what about the book did people find really compelling when they were reading it? Were there moments in the book that you just felt really connected to him as the author, or places where you could say, I totally get that and I agree? What was it? Anybody have any thoughts?
Can I just interject just quickly? So, you know, I guess I read his writing of this book a little different than Matthew, in the sense of even in the subtitle. So it's what they feel, how they communicate, and then discoveries from a secret world. And discoveries implies these are new findings, and that there's science involved, and then the list of references in the back, which if you look through, so there's footnotes throughout the text, but if you look through those references, quite a few of them are what we call gray literature. So they are published, but they're not published in something that's peer reviewed. And you have to be a little careful in that. So if you were writing, for example, a peer reviewed article, you cannot use gray literature as one of your sources for it.
Wow.
Anyway, just an aside. So if it really is a generalized book, then don't provide a list of references which suggests that it connects to the science world.
Anybody? Oh, Patricia raises her hand. I love this. Patricia, yeah.
Hi, I was just going to say that I agree with Jeremy. When I picked this book up, I thought I was going to find out a lot more about the science of trees. And so that was where my mindset was, and that's what I was ready for. And I got very confused early on. And then once I found out more about him, about Peter, and what his real goal was, then if I could adjust my expectations, it worked better. But I looked at all the notes, and I agree with Jeremy that it's not science. It was in the nonfiction section, so I expected that. I would put it, like you said, environment, but spiritual environment, because I totally agree with his premise. I mean, I feel that same way about trees. I always have. I mean, I never lost that since I was a kid, but it's not science. And so that was what I had a hard time with. And once I adjusted my expectations, then I could relax and enjoy the rest of the book.
Yeah, thanks, Trish. That was great. Anybody want to add on to that or share a response to that? Matt.
I think the misunderstanding there is about new to whom. Jeremy, it may not be new to specialists, but a lot of this stuff, I think if we went and interviewed 10 or 15 people or 100 people on the street, I think a lot of people would be surprised by some of the science that's come to light in the last several decades about forests. And so I think he's trying to popularize that. And I think it's probably fair to say that this book sold more copies than all the other forest management books combined, probably, right? I mean, he's reached a lot of people with some of these ideas, and the ideas may be, 30 years old. I'm forgetting the name of the I think highly respected woman who did the afterword.
Oh, Suzanne Simard.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, she doesn't endorse everything he says, but she kind of hooks up what her work, how her work connects to his. And I'm not saying she is beyond reproach either. Obviously, in the world of science, it's always a debate, but anyway, I'm just responding to the idea that he's saying it's new. I think it is new for his audience. His audience, the way the book is written, is not for specialists. And for those people, me included, a lot of this stuff about, I remember a Radiolab episode a few years ago about the fungal networks underneath of forests. And I mean, true, that stuff is not brand new, but it was brand new to a lot of people listening to Radiolab and other sources of media. So I think new is relative.
Yeah, I liked how you said that. I remember that Radiolab. And Richard, I saw that you were going to say something. Am I right in thinking you might have been ready to say something? So yeah, Richard.
Yeah, with the caveat that I didn't get a chance to finish the book. I wished when he was writing, I had like a link I could click to see what he was talking about, where it was on the spectrum of accepted, where folks think if this is like his conjecture or this, that's what I wished I knew. And I did find it frustrating sometimes to be not sure.
So
well, I totally respect how it has reached more people this way, but I would like to know before I spout off some of these things without having to get a master's.
That's good. Thanks, Richard. I love this. We're getting lots of interest. Kathleen.
Well, one thing, it's a little off the subject for a moment, but we're talking about a person who lives in Germany in the Black Forest. And so it's a very specific endeavor that he did in a particular area. And so I don't know anything about the Black Forest. So, but I know that quite a few of his citations are in German. And some of them are like the Global Change Biology, Journal of Ecology, Basic and Applied Ecology. I didn't know anything about their backing and stuff like that, but I'm sure that, and some of them are in German, so I can't even understand those. But I think it's a very specific endeavor to talk about a particular forest and not to apply it so much to our forest completely. So that's my point with that.
Okay, fair enough. That's great. And how about Trisha? I saw you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think part of my reaction is I came to that book after having just finished the Overstory. So I wanted to know more about the underground communications and how it worked, and the I'll call them pheromones because I know more about animals, but the chemical, sorry, I got another phone call, the chemical communication and things. And so I came at it with the perspective, this is so cool. I want to learn this. And the Overstory was clearly fiction, but it had some science in it. So I wanted more science. So that's really all. But I think I understand totally what he was trying to do. That wasn't my expectation when I picked up the book. That's all.
Yeah, interesting. Is there anybody who hasn't had a chance to share, who would like to share a perspective? I just want to make sure we have everybody who's wanted to talk have a chance to say something. Oh, Kristen. Oh, yeah.
Actually talk today. I just wanted to say that through this whole COVID era, the one word that's really stuck out to me a lot is nuance. I think the same could be applied to this. And I looked up, I haven't read the book, so I don't have any sort of bias, but I thought it was interesting that the Dewey Decimal System, the number that this book falls into my local library is number 582 under the science and mathematics category, not say religion 200 numbers. That's all.
Wow, I love that, Kristen. Thanks for doing that library research. And that's pretty fascinating. And I do think, I'm in the process of a book. I have a book coming out, and you write the book, and you have, as the author, you have a way that you're thinking of how you want it. And then when the publisher gets it, they have a marketing team typically, and they're looking at how can they frame the book to sell as many books as they want. And so, maybe it was framed by the publishers as science more than how he might have wanted it framed, or what his intention was. And we won't know that, but the marketing of the book has been pretty darn good. And it's led to him writing lots of other books that are kind of on the same theme, like The Hidden Life of Animals and The Secret Way of the Woods. And he's got this kind of way of writing, or the way that he's packaged is that he sort of has this insight into a secret world, a world that is revealed through his deep and long relationship of being involved in the woods. And so I just think it's interesting. I really love, Kristen, that you checked out the Dewey Decimal. Love it. So anybody else want to add anything? Okay, because I would like to say that this seems like a really good, Richard, sorry.
Sorry, I just I feel like you dropped that bomb. You're coming out with a book. That's awesome. Congratulations. And I want to know what it's about. And I want to know, after this experience, if you'd ever want to come to the Harris Center Book Club discussion.
Well, luckily my book is for kids, so it'll be a kids book discussion, and they might not be as fierce, or maybe they'll be fiercer. I don't know, but I'll talk more about my book at another time, hopefully next year at this time when it actually is out. So, but this is a really perfect chance for us to turn it over to Jeremy, who has a background in science, really has that forester's eye, a view of the forest that people like me, even though I'm a naturalist, I don't see the world the way he has had the opportunity to study it and understand it. And since this book seems to want to reveal sort of the secrets and the hidden life of trees and forest, let's see what somebody like Jeremy has to say about it. And Jeremy, take it away.
We did send out, or Susie tried to send out, this article, or a link to this article. It's actually an opinion piece in Scientific America that doesn't deal with the hidden life of trees directly, but it's sort of responding to this whole wave of books and some of the research that's going on. So this is by Catherine Flynn, and it came out just in the middle of July. And I just want to read a couple sections of this. This is towards the end of that. And I just sent this all to you this morning so you can read the whole thing. Okay, so this is way towards the end. It's the last 3 paragraphs. In interviews, Simard, and Simard is the one who Peter quotes all the time, and she's really advanced our understanding of, I'm not going to use the word communication or network, but she's advanced our understanding of the fact that materials are flowing between mycorrhizal connections to trees in a much more dynamic fashion than anyone ever anticipated. We've long known that trees have these incredible relationships with fungi below ground that allows them to much more effectively get nutrients and even get water out of dry soils. And if trees don't have this relationship, they grow much slower. This isn't true just for trees, it's true for all plants, in fact. But what she's finding is that there's much more transfer of material within those fungal colonies in the soil than anyone ever anticipated. So that hormones from trees wind up, hormones or photosynthates, the energy produced by trees, wind up going through tree roots, going into the mycorrhizal mats, but then even being transferred among those mycorrhizal mats at a rate that's very surprising. What's really not clear, and if you really pinned her on this, she would not say that it's direct communication or proactive communication, that it's what's not clear is what's actually happening in that function. That's not to say it's not really cool, it is, but it's not clear what the purpose of it is or what it's achieving in that sense. So I'm just going to read these three paragraphs because I think they're really useful. So in interviews, Simard has said she purposely uses anthropomorphism and culturally weighted words like mother, even though the trees in question are male as well as female, so that people can relate to trees better. Because if we can relate to it, then we're going to care about it more. That sounds good. Do trees need to have human values and emotions for us to let them live? The science supporting conservation is compelling enough. New discoveries about the underground world are thrilling enough. The public deserves to hear this true story without the confusion of personification and stretched metaphor. These distractions keep us from confronting reality. Facilitation, this is organisms helping each other, may be real, but so is the Darwinian struggle for existence. We are moral creatures in an amoral world. Nature does not share our values, and mercifully, we may choose not to emulate all of nature's ways. Between treating plants as objects or as humans, I suggest a third way. Let's seek to understand plants on their own terms. Plants are fundamentally different, are fundamentally unlike us, mute, rooted, and inscrutable. We need to meet the challenges of cultivating respect for organisms that are different from us, in their separate and complex bodies, in their sophisticated interactions, in their unfathomable lives. So it just is a way of thinking about it. And she's pointing out some of I guess in my mind, the problems of creating this sense for, we'll use the underground communication network as a thing. If that doesn't turn out to be, and it certainly hasn't yet proven to be what people are claiming it to be, have we deceived people, and will that turn people off in the long term? Or would it have been better just to talk about how important fungal relationships are to trees to begin with? Anyway, that opinion piece out this morning, and I think it's a good overview of what we've been talking about, or a good take on what we've been talking about. Richard, in answer to your question, as I read through this book, I was trying to come up with percentages of what's out there, way out on the fringes of beliefs, or what's sort of within a conventional understanding of the forest. And I would say, boy, it's hard to put a thing on it, but I would say something like 40% of it falls within conventional, and about 60% of it is overreach and stretch and making conclusions that are kind of way beyond what we have the evidence to support. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm just sort of coming up with that on the fly. It may not be accurate. So I wanted to take a couple examples from the text, and then just go through some slides to show how I think about it, or I learned about it, and just to provide a counter argument. So the first one is just on page 5 of the book. It's in the chapter called Friendships, and he's talking about trees growing near to each other. You can check this out for yourself. This is the start of the second paragraph on the page 5. You can check this out for yourself simply by looking up into the forest canopy. The average tree grows its branches out until it encounters the branch tips of a neighboring tree of the same height. It doesn't grow any wider because the air and better light in this space are already taken. Partly true, but I mean, that's relatively accurate. That is to say that trees don't grow branches into places that there isn't light available, because branches are autonomous in a tree, or relatively autonomous. That is to say, if a branch is in a dark space, it dies. And so branches that grow into those darker spaces tend to be shaded, and that branch can't support itself, and the tree, the branch dies. You don't see a branch in that place, or a portion of a branch. But let's go on with this. However, it heavily reinforces the branch as it is extended. So you get the impression there's quite a shoving match going on up there. I'll talk a little later about there actually is a shoving match going on up there, but it's induced by wind. But a pair of true friends is careful right from the outset. And by true friends, he's talking about two trees that are growing really close to each other, and implying that their friends might be a mistake, or might be an overreach. Not to grow overly thick branches in each other's direction. The trees don't want to take anything away from each other. We're really getting into personification here. We're saying the trees are actually thinking about how they're growing next to a neighbor, and how they're impacting each other. So they develop sturdy branches only at the outer edges of the crown. That is to say, away from where the trees are interacting, only in the direction of non-friends. Such partners are often so tightly connected at the roots that sometimes they even die together. So I thought I'd just share some slides to just talk a little bit about tree growth and give you a sense for why this might be problematic, or a different interpretation. So it's spruce. It's a red spruce, which is one of the 3 spruce species we have around here. We have white spruce, red spruce, and black spruce. Red spruce would be the most common that you'd see, and one of my favorite trees. And so trees grow in 2 ways. There's primary growth, which is elongation of branches. And you can see primary growth, particularly in a species like spruce. And he talks about that in the book with beech scales, but just looking at it in the same way, just looking at what is the growth in a particular year. So you can see that is this year's growth on the apical meristem of this particular branch here. So that 4 inches represents this year's growth. But then we can start looking backwards. That was last year's growth. That was the previous year's growth, and so on and so on. And you can see that spruce needles stick around a long time, and it's 7 to 9 years, actually, spruce needles will stay on a tree. And by the way, the lateral branches are also showing that same pattern of growth. And so you get this series growing throughout the tree. So this is what's called primary growth, the elongation of stem. And it happens like this. And then there's also secondary growth, which is the expansion of stems. And we can see that in tree rings. There aren't tree rings in all species, but most of the species around here have tree rings. And so this is a balsam fir. And you can see that there's a central core where the tree rings were relatively tight. This tree wasn't expanding much. But then there's plasticity in how a tree can grow. So when there was what was called a pre-commercial thinning in this stand, the tree was released. And you can see how much the growth rings have increased after that thinning outside of the blue line. Does that make sense to everyone? So we have primary and secondary growth, elongation versus thickening of trees. And those two things combined mean that trees are incredibly plastic in how they form, because unlike humans, or fish or animals, where there's a form that we'll grow into that's close. I mean, we may be heavier or lighter or a little bit taller with better nutrition or a little bit shorter. We still look pretty much the same. For trees, it's very different. Their growth is stored each year in this incremental growth in both primary and secondary. And so you can have a red oak grown within a forest environment where you have very few branches, particularly on the sides that there's competition on, because there's been competition. That is to say, that it's been shaded out on that side, so that if there were branches on that side, it's not that they didn't grow, it's that they didn't persist. They didn't survive because they weren't in an environment that was enough light. There was too much competition for it. Whereas if you have a red oak that's open grown, you'll see its branches spread in all directions because there's a favorable environment in all directions. So the branches not only persist, but grow quickly in all directions. This is a little popsicle diagram just to show this. So if trees are growing with enough space between them, they'll have that open grown appearance because branches in all directions will survive, persist, and continue to grow. And so you wind up with what we call an open grown tree. This is a sugar maple. And you can see that there's never been competition for the sugar maple. In every direction, it's expanded and its branches have survived and grown. But if trees are growing a little closer together, then they start to compete much earlier. And so their branches start to shade one another. There's both shading and there's abrasion. So as the tree gets taller and taller, the trees sway in the wind, and if they crash into each other, you get abrasion. And all of us can see this if we go out after a windstorm, particularly if it's been a snow and then a windstorm. Go out and look around the forest floor. There are little branchlets everywhere because trees batter each other. Not to say that they're trying to batter each other, they're just being blown in the wind. And so you get all this abrasion, and terminal leaders are knocked off branches all over the place, and you'll find them all over the canopy floor. So it's a good thing to look for after a snow and a pretty strong wind. So you can see in this image that these branches that are now facing stiff competition and being shaded die and eventually fall off the tree because they'll rot away, and then the tree will heal that wound. So if the closer you get, the sooner that that competition will occur, the sooner the crown liftoff will occur. And we've all seen young stands of hardwoods or conifers where you see this intense competition with slender young stems that don't have big branches because there's competition in all directions. And so the branches can't persist and grow for long periods of time. Older forest showing an American beech, not a European beech. This is a beautiful example because it's completely free of beech bark disease. But the same kind of thing. You see, there's no branches down low because there was intense competition, meaning those branches were being shaded constantly. So this is just an example from the Pacific Northwest. This is Douglas fir and Western hemlock. And you can see, again, very small branches because these trees grew with that intense competition going on. Now, here's an example that matches Peter's. These are two oaks that are actually growing out of the same stump. They're stump sprouts. So this was a tree that was cut, and there were stump sprouts that came out from that tree. We'll talk later about the competition associated with the stump sprouts, but these are the two survivors. And you can see that on the sides facing each other, and this is what he describes, that the trees are not, there's no branches out into that space between them. But did the trees know that they were beside each other like that? Or is this a function of the fact that there was stiff competition and the branches on that side were really small? And the evidence from long-term studies is it's not that they're detecting each other and not sending out branches in that direction. There are actually branches in that direction, but they've disappeared over time because they didn't survive. And so they don't grow and persist. They just disappear, and you don't see the remains of the branches that once existed between these two trees. So there's a different take on what he's on Peter. Just love to get any sense of, does that change people's perspective of it? Do you do you still feel like the trees are interacting, or is this really a function of we're just seeing the results of long-term competition that's stored in these tree bodies, which I think is one of the most fundamentally, it's one of the things that fascinates me most about trees, is this storage of life, of the life story within the structure of the tree, so that you can really read trees. You can look back at what they experienced in their lives. Susie, I don't know, how do you react?
I loved how you just framed it at the end as it being the life story of the trees. And I think that I'm just curious. So, you translated, like you gave us the science behind kind of what he was saying. And he gives us sort of a stretched out story, or a story with liberties, maybe is the way to say it. But I'm wondering, maybe there's an in-between ground. What do people think? It's quiet it's quiet out here, Jeremy.
Well, I think he's right. I think if you look at individual segments of forests, that's how they do function. So, yeah.
Kathleen, when you say you think he's right, are you saying you think?
Oh, I think Jeremy's right.
Right. Okay, great.
Yeah, it is interesting how 150 years ago a tree had been cut, and now there's two massive trees growing side to side like that. And I don't think that they chose to grow side to side. Okay.
All right. Well, Jeremy, do you have another example? Oh, Matt. Yeah.
But just to clarify, Jeremy, he is saying in the passage that you pointed to, how do we say his name, by the way? Is it Wohlleben? How do you pronounce his last name?
I say Wohlleben, but I don't know if that's correct.
Okay, that sounds awesome.
That's why I'm calling him Peter, because I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
All right, great. We'll say Peter. I can do Peter. So what Peter's saying is, he's not saying that no branches grow in that direction. He's saying that the tree is careful not to grow overly thick branches in that direction. I'm not defending Peter. I'm just trying to clarify what what exactly you're saying that the studies show, because it isn't that they would show there's 0 branches, but that rather the tree is not putting a whole lot of resources in that direction.
Yeah, I think it's not the observation. It's the cause that's problematic here. He's implying that the trees are, in essence, cooperating. They know each other that they're beside another tree, and they're using different branch patterns based on that. I'm suggesting that we can explain the same phenomena simply by competition, in that if these trees would be growing branches in all directions, the branches where they're growing towards each other are going to be quickly shaded, and those branches will not persist. And so we'll end up with an image like I showed you, where the two oaks have no branches on that side, and You
Sure,
can go
okay.
into any forest and see this kind of pattern.
So
So
that,
it's really the causation of it.
okay.
I'm saying it's the trees storing the story of its life, of its competitive life within the structure of the tree.
Yeah, so it seems like you're saying same observation, same evidence. You can describe one as competition. You can describe the same evidence as cooperation in quotes, I guess. I don't know if Peter would put it in quotes, but we can put it in quotes, cooperation.
Well, the
Yes.
chapter is called friendship, so I'd assume he
Yeah,
wouldn't
right,
even put
right.
it in quotes. He'd say it's cooperation.
Yeah, right. That's fair. I guess the only thing I point out is that even in human relationships, the line between cooperation and competition is really hard to draw. That there are lots of things that are, I'm really cooperative with my wife Liz in ways that are pretty competitive, and I'm competitive with her in ways that end up cooperating and end up creating a family. So I just think that drawing a line between those two is really tricky, even in our own experience. So that's just an observation. It's not disagreeing, but it's just saying, I think there's a lot of wiggle room or fuzziness between those two grand explanations that we have, competition versus cooperation. There's a lot of overlap.
Well said. I like that. And it is so true. And I guess this might get me axed from the Harris Center staff, but there's a piece of me that just needs to stand up and say, I do believe, and I mean, I believe in ghosts. Just a forewarning, I believe in, things that maybe other people would find really like crazy to believe in. But I do believe that or other organisms besides humans have consciousnesses that we don't necessarily understand through our own, that doesn't make sense to us in our own human idea of what it means to be conscious or aware of other things around us. And perhaps this book is just saying, is a recognizing that trees have a way of being that is different than we are, but we try to understand it through our language or our lens, but they have a consciousness. So I'll just put that out there and I'll wait for my pink slip at the end of the day. Is anybody, Kristen, do you want to add anything?
So I just wanted to add again, reemphasize that word nuance. That's sort of what I was trying to say earlier. And I think that, I guess I'm not a specialist, so it's really interesting to hear everyone's perspective. I haven't read the book, but if I could just relate my undergraduate experience as an anthropology student in the Southwest, it was really interesting to focusing on physical anthropology. So my favorite professor was an archaeologist, but as a early 20-something, I couldn't quite understand how he considered himself a man of faith. I was being taught evolution for the first time as a 20-something, and so couldn't the same apply? And does it really matter in terms of a pink slip? But we're all individuals, so our philosophy, spirituality, worldview it's self-ownership, the point of view and the ideology. And I guess as a person who was taught the science and then relates to Indigenous Americans very deeply in terms of medicine or through my sensorial experiences in the woods, that appreciation does it really matter? But yet having that deep respect for science and taught that paradigm through the university. Or can we just apply this new, I wasn't in college when intersectionality was very popular. It seems like another word that stood out to me through all my readings through this pandemic experience, intersection. Is there an intersection of worldview and science? And I think it's all okay.
Yeah, so well said. Anybody want to add anything else?
I'll add one quick slide. So I'm going to share my screen again. So back to the image we were just looking at of these two grand oaks, and this is on Old Dublin Road, which has some of the most beautiful oaks you'll see if you drive down it, where we don't see branches, where there's competition between the trees. And Matt's right. Well, could it be one or the other? Well, I'll give you an example of this isn't an oak. This is a cottonwood, and it's an enormous tree that I just saw growing along the Hudson, just south of Albany, New York. And just to give you a sense, the diameter of the trunk, I'm in the picture, in the image, I'm far away from the tree. The diameter of that trunk is about 8 feet. This is a huge tree, but you'll notice that the tree grows extensively, or the branching pattern grows extensively towards the water. But on the other side, it doesn't. And yet there's no competition there. So why would this tree have had this form? Just like those oaks, it's basically branchless on one side, and all of its growth is grown in another direction. Any ideas of what would have created this?
Wind?
Kathleen, did you say something?
I said wind?
Could be wind. Wind certainly affects the forms of trees, often by killing buds and changing how they grow because of that. In this case, it's something much simpler. This region, the Hudson River, was incredibly famous for ice production. In fact, it supplied all of New York's ice, and the ice was shipped all over the world. And there was a 5-story ice house, the size of a football field, in that field that I'm looking at, next to this, that this tree grew up beside. So here is the identical characteristic of a tree, but not created because there was a tree growing beside it, but because there was a solid structure growing beside it, implying that those branches didn't survive that went out that way because they were shaded by the building. All right.
Maybe it was
Susie,
friends with the ice house.
What's that?
Maybe it was friends with the ice house.
Could have been. The posts and beams in the ice house. Another example I'll give is that in his chapter slowly, number 6, Slowly Does It, he talks about how important it is for trees to grow slowly. And he talks about trees taking on a flat-topped appearance when they're in the deep shade, and then as the mother trees are experience some kind of mortality through a disturbance, these trees will slowly make it into the canopy. But I wanted just a quick thing. This is called crown shyness. This is that battering of tree crowns that I was talking about, that it's not just that the branches don't persist, but they'll actually create space between the trees associated with wind activity. This is in eucalyptus trees in Australia. So we have lots and lots of examples of trees that can grow very slowly in the understory, and they tend to be what we call shade tolerant trees. So trees that can persist at much lower light levels than other trees. It doesn't mean they grow quickly, because they don't. And they can grow very, very slowly. This is an example of an eastern hemlock, looking at its height versus age. And for the first 40 years of its life, it was under 8 feet in height. So a small tree. And then there was a big release in the canopy, and the tree took off. So that sort of matches Peter's story. And this is an example of what we call a flat-topped understory tree, where it's in deep, deep shade, and it takes on what he characterizes as a flat-topped appearance. And you'll see trees like this a lot. They tend to be shade-tolerant trees, so they can persist in those low light levels. And basically, it seems to be associated with the fact that there's a big advantage to having a single layer of leaves, because you don't self-shade yourself in dark conditions. And again, it's really about which branches survive in that flat-topped appearance, which buds and branches survive in that flat-topped appearance comes out of that pattern. So you can see often conifers are something we have strong epinastic control, although that's not true of all conifers, but that's where the apical meristem actually puts out hormones to restrict growth of the lateral buds. And trees with strong epinastic control, the terminal leader, the leader right at the top of the tree, has a lot of control over how the other branches are growing or the rate of growing. And then you can have a period where it's beneath, really deep shade, and it takes on a flat topped appearance like the hemlock I showed. And then that can be released and the tree will be relatively straight because there's so much epinastic control in the tree. Hardwoods, on the other hand, tend to have very weak epinastic control. The terminal leader doesn't really control the lateral branches all that effectively. And in fact, that's why we get the sort of broccoli bushy appearance to hardwoods, because there's much less hormonal control from the terminal leader than there is in many of the conifers. And so if we have something like a beech in the understory that goes flat topped, it will look something like that. But then when it's released, it often is released in odd ways, like it will have a big bend in the trunk, or it will have a couple leaders that take over, and it won't be the classic growth that Peter talks about, growing out of these trees that have been in high shade like this. So I'll just give you an example. This is from Thailand, actually. This is this is the Hopio odorata forest. It's this incredible forest with these trees are, 45 meters tall, 50 meters tall, just beautiful straight trunks going right into the and creating a classic sort of canopy. The same species growing in the understory under shade grows like this. It gets very flat topped and you get bends and twists. And here's the thing, these trees will never, ever grow into this tree. They can't, because that history is stored in their structure. A tree can't unbend once there's a kink in its trunk. And so I raise this point that slowly does it implies that all trees would grow effectively with deep shade and then release, and that's really not what's found in nature. To get straight trees with small branches, it tends to be they need to have competition throughout their lives. From peers, so from trees that are a similar size. That's what really keeps trees growing straight and reduces their branchiness.
Hey, Jeremy, I'm just keeping my eyes to the time, and I wanted to
I know,
make
I see
sure.
that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was really fascinating, and it's so good to hear like this different, I don't want to say different, but just to hear the science, more conventional expression of the science. And I wondered if anybody had any questions in particular for Jeremy before we closed out for today.
Yeah, I want to finish on 3 slides that I think are particularly useful for this, but let's just do questions quickly and then.
Stunned everybody.
Okay, well, let me just go
Oh,
into
wait,
these.
Trisha has a question.
Oh,
Is
okay.
that true? Yay! Still muted, Trisha. You got to unmute yourself. I know.
Sorry. Jeremy, what I was hoping is that maybe you guys could send us a note with some other references, might be too strong a word, but other things to read that might be a good synopsis for the non-forester, just because the stuff you've been talking about is fascinating. And I'd just like to know a little bit more, but I'm not going to read the scientific journals. So I didn't know if there was something else that you might have that. So anyway, just food for thought for later.
Yeah, well, there's not a lot actually, and that's problematic.
Okay.
In that what happens is I'm working on a book too now, and it's a rewrite of an existing book called Forest Stand Dynamics. And
perfect, that's what I'm looking for.
It's an extraordinary book, and it's the most referenced item in forest ecology. So this is a rewrite of it. So it came out originally in the 80s.
What is it called?
Forest stand dynamics. The problem is it's written for academicians. There isn't a, they're just, you know, academicians do not get any benefit from publishing in more popular journals. And so you just don't see a lot of that crossover. And so there aren't good examples of people really working in forest ecology, but also providing information to the general public. Okay, Susie, can I just do 3 things that I think it's important to think about these. So we talk about cooperation and the importance of it. And I don't mean to imply that I don't believe in that. Okay. Let's see. Let me try this one more time. Okay, so I think most of you have probably seen this. A tree gets cut and there's a stump. It's called stump sprouting. And the tree vigorously, and this, not all trees can do this, but hardwoods in particular can. In this case, it's red maple. Vigorously throw out shoots that grow very fast because they're using the root system of the old tree. And it's called stump sprouting. It's incredibly important reproduction in the Northeast. And in many forested regions. In fact, if you walk around any of the forests in this region, you'll find stump sprouts of multiple different kinds of hardwood species, just because it's really a critical way of reproduction. But do you see how many sprouts there are coming out of that stump? So that's how they start. They're an intense array, you know, oftentimes 10 or 20 saplings emerge from the stump and start growing together. When we look at stump sprouts that are old, guess how many are left? 2, 3, and sometimes 4. So these are some different species examples. These are literally clones of that tree. They are the same genetics of each other because they're emerging from the same stump. There has been no sexual reproduction here. This is just vegetative reproduction. And yet these trees, which in this world of cooperation and communication should be more in tune with each other than anything else, are competing as intensely or more intensely than trees that are growing separately. And you can see that in how, you know, if a tree makes it, it does great, but they have to go through a intense period of competition to get through. Anyway, I'll end on that because both Susie and I have to go, but.
Before we go, I just want to thank everybody for coming to this class and reading the book or thinking about the book or looking at the support material. And I have come up with 2 new ideas. One is Jeremy's going to have to teach an ESI class on forest stand dynamics. That would be really cool.
I did that last year.
I know. Well, we want it again. We need it more. We need more. And then the other thing is I was thinking maybe for another book, we might read Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard, which is more of a memoir of her work. So you can look at the winter calendar for that. And yeah, thank you so much for contemplating this book, and thank you for sharing and being present. And yeah, I'll give everybody one of these. So everybody maybe head out and give a tree a hug today. See if it hugs you back in its own way.
Thank you, Susie. I found both explanations fascinating, and I think whatever will work to get people to appreciate nature I'm all for it. And I just finished reading a book called Massacre at Fall Creek. It's by Jessamine West. I don't know if that name rings any bells. She was quite a prolific author, probably best known for Friendly Persuasion, which I think was made into a movie with Gregory Peck. This book is about the first time white men were prosecuted for the murder of Indians. Actually, the first time that it was called murder. And they were found guilty. 3 of them were hanged. And a huge gallows built of oak and I forget what else was erected for the occasion. And one of the lawyers seeing it for the first time says, "Oh, I wonder what the trees think about that." So, and that was in the 1970s. So there you go. Thank
That's
you.
great. Thank you, Rosemary, and goodbye to everybody. See you hopefully sometime out there, giving some trees some hugs and
Okay.
looking
And I
for
hope you got the
crown
photograph
shiners.
of, whoops. I hope